For 1,000 years the galaxy lived with one belief, one truth written in every book, every school, every database. That Earth was gone and humans were extinct, wiped out in a flash of fire and silence, forgotten like dust in the wind, and in that 1,000 years empires rose with pride and empires fell with screams. New species took power, old species vanished, wars were fought, borders changed, but no one ever spoke the word human with fear anymore, because humans were nothing but old. Legend, an ancient story told to children, a warning that once a small blue world tried to rise too fast and was punished by fate, and so the galaxy moved forward without them, believing the past was dead forever, until one quiet day became the most terrifying day in history, because without warning every scanner in every star system began to scream with alarms, red lights, broken signals, vibrating screens, as if the universe itself was shaking, and ships across thousands of light years froze. In confusion while scientists stared at impossible readings, numbers that made no sense, energy levels higher than anything ever recorded, and suddenly the calm black of space began to twist like liquid, bending, shaking, tearing open as if invisible hands were ripping reality apart, forming a massive wound in the stars, a glowing crack of white and black light that stretched wider and wider until it looked like a doorway into something unknown, something alive, something angry, and every empire, every leader, every soldier turned their eyes to the sky with fear, because no natural force could do this, no known technology could do this, and deep in their hearts they felt something ancient waking up, something that should have stayed buried, and as the tear grew bigger the galaxy fell silent, battles stopped, trading ships halted, patrol fleets froze in place, because from that impossible rift a massive shadow slowly began to appear, moving with a heavy, slow, terrifying calm. Like a monster returning from the grave, and as it came closer the shadow revealed its shape, not soft like a planet, not smooth like a station, but covered in sharp metallic plates, endless armored layers, black like night and shining like steel, wrapped around a round world that pulsed with light like a giant mechanical heart, and every mind that saw it felt the same cold truth. This was a planet, a full world, but not a normal one, because this world was not made of rock and water anymore. It was wrapped in metal, stitched with machinery, surrounded by rings of weapon-like structures, and in glowing silver letters across its surface one word stood clear in the darkness. Earth. And the moment that word appeared, the galaxy's blood turned to ice, because Earth had not been destroyed, Earth had not died, Earth had not vanished into dust, Earth had returned, and it had returned wrapped in armor like a colossal war machine, and entire populations began to scream, dropping to their knees. In panic, asking impossible questions, how could Earth still exist? How could a dead world rise again? How could a destroyed species bring back a whole planet? And the fear deepened when the rift behind Earth kept twisting as if more shapes were waiting to come through, and commanders everywhere rushed to their ships, shouting orders, trying to form fleets, but their voices shook, their hands trembled, because no one understood what kind of power could move a whole planet across dimensions. Through time, through space, and in the highest chambers of the Galactic Council the leaders stared at live footage, terrified, speechless, because they remembered the old stories, the whispers that humans were ambitious, unpredictable, dangerous, that humans could grow faster than any species, that humans could adapt, invent, and fight beyond reason, and they remembered one last forgotten prophecy carved into ancient alien stone. Fear the day Earth returns. And now that day had come, and as the armored world slowly turned, every scanner system across the galaxy went blind, shutting down instantly as if burned by invisible fire. Entire networks crashed, warships lost power, cities flickered into darkness, and a silent cold message was left in their systems with no source, no voice, just 3 chilling words. We have returned, and that message spread like a storm, echoing across space, reaching every empire, every colony, every moon. And people began to realize the truth that made their hearts stop. Humans were not extinct, humans were not gone, humans were back, and they had changed, evolved, transformed into something no one could understand. And the fear spread deeper when sensor teams discovered that Earth's surface no longer showed oceans, forests, or cities. Instead it was covered with glowing metal continents, giant hexagon panels, enormous vents releasing energy, and strange towers reaching into space like spears ready to strike. And the more they analyzed, the more horrifying the truth became. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a weapon, a massive technological world that could not have been built by any known empire, and whispers spread through military bases. If humans built this, what else did they build? If Earth returned like this, what happened to the humans themselves? Were they still flesh and bone, or had they become something new, something beyond mortal limits? And in that moment the galaxy felt small and helpless for the first time. In 1,000 years, because the universe had changed and no one was prepared. And far away in a silent star system a young alien child tugged on her mother's sleeve and asked in a shaking voice, "Mom, what are humans?" And the mother, trembling, could only answer, "The reason we should be afraid." And the fear deepened further when ships sent to investigate got close enough to see moving structures on Earth's surface. Giant mechanical doors slowly opening like the jaws of a beast, revealing endless darkness inside, as if something was preparing to come out. And the leaders in the Galactic Council leaned forward in horror, watching broadcasts, waiting for any sign of life, any message, any explanation. But Earth remained silent, turning slowly, watching the galaxy like a giant eye, and the silence was worse than any threat, because silence meant control, silence meant confidence, silence meant power. And as the light from the rift flickered behind the armored world, the Council's oldest member whispered the words no one wanted to hear. Humans have become something we cannot measure. And those words spread through every hall, every broadcast, every whisper, until the whole galaxy echoed with one terrified question: what have the humans become? And in that question lived the beginning of the greatest fear in history, because everyone knew the truth deep inside, even if they tried to deny it. Earth had not come back to be forgotten. Earth had not come back to be weak. Earth had come back with purpose, power, and silence, and the galaxy had no idea what would happen next. Panic spread faster than light, faster than logic, faster than breath, and across thousands of worlds people screamed, alarms wailed, soldiers ran, leaders shouted orders they didn't understand. Because no one knew what to do when a dead world came back armored like a god of war, and in every control room officers stared at frozen screens, dead scanners, silent systems, realizing their greatest fear. Earth had shut them down without firing a single shot, and that silence felt like a hand around the galaxy's throat, tight, cold, inescapable, and millions of voices whispered in terror, "How strong are they now?" And on the bridge of the largest patrol fleet near the rift, a young alien officer with shaking hands tried to restart their engines, but nothing responded, buttons dead, power gone. And he looked at his captain with wide, terrified eyes because their ship was the pride of their empire and now it acted like a broken toy, useless in front of the armored Earth. And the captain, once proud and fearless, could only stare out the window at the metallic world, feeling smaller than dust, wondering how a species once mocked as weak could return with power that crippled entire fleets. And across the stars civilian ships drifted powerless, mothers holding crying children, fathers trying to calm their families, everyone asking the same question. What happens if Earth decides to strike? And in massive cities people ran into the streets staring at the sky screens showing live footage of the rift, their hearts pounding as the image zoomed closer to Earth's surface, where dark armored panels moved like muscle, shifting, clicking, preparing for something unknown. And fear crawled into every mind because nothing natural moved like that, nothing alive, nothing dead, and it felt as if Earth itself was breathing, watching, waiting. And in the highest chamber of the Galactic Council 12 leaders gathered, trembling, arguing, shouting over each other, some demanding war, some begging for peace, some crying openly because no weapon, no strategy, no science in the galaxy had ever controlled space the way Earth just did. And one counselor slammed his fist on the table, voice cracking as he shouted, "This is impossible, a planet cannot return, a species cannot survive extinction." But deep inside they all knew the truth. They underestimated humans, they always had, and now that mistake had come back wearing armor thicker than mountains. And while the council fought with words and fear, emergency broadcasts spread through every home, every school, every station, warning people to stay calm. But their voices shook because even the announcers didn't believe their own words, and in military academies young cadets stared at old history files showing pictures of humans as small, soft, biological creatures, and they couldn't connect those fragile beings with the monstrous armored Earth now hanging in space like a silent threat. And one cadet whispered, "What did they become in those 1,000 years?" And no teacher could answer, because the galaxy had always assumed humans faded quietly into nothing. But now it was clear humans had not faded. They had transformed, evolved into something far beyond reach, and while fear swallowed the galaxy, Earth made its first move, not with weapons, not with ships, but with a pulse of invisible energy that swept across star systems like a silent wave, shutting down more fleets, disabling more defenses, turning mighty warships into dead metal shells, and that single action broke the galaxy's spirit, because this wasn't war, this wasn't battle. This was dominance without violence, control without effort, and, when the wave passed, a single transmission appeared on every screen, every hologram, every device that could display light. Only 3 glowing words written in a cold, emotionless script: "Do not approach," and those words were not loud, not threatening, not violent. Yet they shook every soul because they felt like a warning from a being above empires, above rulers, above fear, and in that moment entire civilizations realized something terrifying. Earth wasn't asking for space, Earth was commanding it, and still no human voice, no face, no explanation, just silence wrapped in overwhelming power, and that silence broke hearts, because the unknown is the deepest fear of all, and in quiet corners of distant planets ordinary people cried, not because of attacks, but because they felt helpless, powerless, tiny against the return of a species they never understood. And in one lonely observation station an old scientist wiped tears from his eyes as he whispered, "We thought humans were weak, but maybe weakness was only their beginning." And across the universe that same emotional truth sank into every mind. The galaxy was no longer the ruler of its own future, because Earth was back, and whatever humans had become, they were stronger than anyone could ever contain. Fear pushed the galaxy into madness, and fear always creates terrible decisions. So while civilians begged for calm and scientists warned against reckless action, the leaders of the Galactic Council chose pride over wisdom, gathering in their towering chamber high above a shining city that now felt fragile and small, and with shaking voices they convinced themselves that humans must be stopped, that Earth must be contained, that no extinct species had the right to return with such power, and beneath their anger lived something darker, shame, because deep inside they remembered the ancient vote, the secret vote that condemned Earth 1,000 years ago, the decision that labeled humans as too ambitious, too dangerous, too unpredictable, and now that past sin felt like a knife pressing into their hearts, so instead of facing guilt, they hid behind arrogance, ordering the formation of the largest military fleet ever assembled, thousands of ships, weapons glowing, crews terrified, engines forced online despite the shutdown wave, and as those ships rose into space, millions watched with tears and dread, because they knew this was not courage. This was fear wearing armor, and on one small ship a young pilot clutched a bracelet her father gave her, whispering that she didn't want to die, that she didn't want to fight ghosts, that she didn't want to face a world she had been taught was nothing more than myth, and she cried quietly while her captain stared forward with hollow eyes, because even he knew deep down that they were flying toward a mistake so big it could break history. But orders were orders, and orders left no room for emotion. The fleet surrounded the armored Earth like insects around a sleeping beast, forming a tight ring, weapons locked, targeting systems trembling, commanders shouting countdowns, trying to sound powerful even while their voices cracked. And across the galaxy billions held their breath waiting for Earth to react, waiting for humans to speak, waiting for anything, but Earth stayed silent, unmoving, watching, and that silence crushed them more than any roar could, because silence meant confidence, silence meant control. Silence meant humans were not afraid, and in every heart across every world a painful truth settled. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a funeral waiting to happen, and no one even knew whose. Inside the council chamber the leaders stared at live footage, cold sweat running down their backs, and one finally broke, slamming his trembling hands on the table as tears filled his eyes, shouting that this was madness, that attacking an unknown power was suicide, but his voice was drowned by louder ones. Voices desperate to feel strong, desperate to erase fear by pretending they still ruled the galaxy, and the final order was given. Activate the weapons, force Earth to respond, force humans to reveal themselves, force the past into submission, and across the fleet crews cried quietly, whispering goodbye to their families, whispering prayers, whispering regrets, because they knew this wasn't bravery, this was a last stand against a truth too big to accept. Weapons charged, cannons lit the darkness, targeting beams locked onto Earth's armored surface, and as power surged through circuits, something heartbreaking happened. Communication screens flickered, and for a split second, a single image appeared, a blue planet covered in oceans and clouds, the Earth of the past, beautiful, alive, innocent, and thousands of soldiers gasped, some sobbing, because in that brief memory they saw what humanity once was, fragile, hopeful, desperate to survive, and the weight of that image shattered the lie the galaxy had believed, the lie that humans were monsters, because before anything else humans were just people wanting to live, just like them, and that realization broke something inside them. But the countdown kept falling, unstoppable, merciless. 10, 9, 8. The fleet trembled. 7, 6. Tears fell. 5, 4. A whisper spread through the ships like wind. Please don't do this. 3, 2, 1. But before a single weapon fired, everything stopped, not by force, not by destruction, not by attack. By a voice. A single calm voice that echoed through every ship, every city, every star system, gentle, steady, human. And the moment that voice spoke, millions felt their hearts freeze, stand down. Just 2 words, quiet but powerful, spoken with no anger, no threat, no hate, only certainty, and that certainty crushed the fleet's resolve, because those words didn't sound like a request. They sounded like destiny, and in that moment everyone understood that humans were not returning as victims, not returning as survivors, not returning as equals. Humans were returning as something far greater, and the mistake had already been made. The galaxy had chosen war against a species it no longer understood, and there was no turning back. Silence followed those 2 words, a silence so heavy it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath, and inside every ship, every command room, every crowded city square where terrified citizens watched the broadcast, hearts pounded like drums of fear, because that voice was unmistakably human, deep and calm, carrying a strange, cold echo as if it had traveled through centuries. And the moment people heard it, something ancient stirred in their memories, stories of humans being fearless, stubborn, unstoppable, stories told as warnings, not legends, and now those warnings lived again in a single voice that seemed to speak from the core of the armored Earth. And every soldier aiming a weapon at the planet felt their hands go numb as that voice repeated, slower this time, heavier, like a calm storm ready to break, stand down. No command had ever felt so final, so absolute, and in the flagship at the front of the fleet the young pilot who clutched her bracelet felt tears streaming down her cheeks because that voice didn't sound like a monster. It sounded human, real human, and something deep inside her ached at the thought that humans hadn't died, hadn't disappeared, but had survived alone in the dark for 1,000 years, and she whispered through shaking lips, what did they go through? Her heart hurting for a species she had been taught to fear but suddenly felt sorry for, and across the bridge her captain trembled too, because that voice carried not rage but sorrow, a sorrow so heavy it wrapped around every listener like a shadow full of memories no one had the strength to face. Then without warning the darkness above Earth shifted, metallic plates sliding open like silent gates, revealing a massive circular structure glowing with silver light, and at its center appeared a single holographic image projected into space, visible across the fleet, across the galaxy, across millions of screens. A lone human figure standing tall in a sleek black suit of unknown material, eyes glowing faint white, face calm, expression unreadable, and for the first time in 1,000 years. The galaxy looked into a human face again, not in a book, not in a faded picture, but alive and undeniable, and an emotional shock rippled through empires because the human didn't look broken or weak, but also didn't look machine or alien. Instead he looked like a bridge between flesh and power, something evolved, something changed, something that survived the impossible. His voice echoed again, steady as stone, we did not return for peace, and millions flinched, some gasping, some sobbing, some collapsing to their knees because they heard the pain buried inside those words. Pain so deep it sounded like a wound stretching across centuries. And then he finished, we returned for justice. And those words stabbed the council harder than any weapon, because justice was not random, justice was not chaos. Justice meant someone had done something terribly wrong. Justice meant there was a crime, a betrayal, a truth buried under 1,000 years of lies. And in the council chamber one leader's face drained white as he remembered the classified order, the hidden project, the final command given long ago when fear ruled their hearts, the command that doomed Earth, and he whispered in horror, they know. The human raised his eyes, staring directly into the camera, directly into the galaxy, and for a heartbeat the universe felt smaller than him, and he spoke again, voice cracking just slightly with emotion, you left us to die. And millions froze because in that sentence lived 1,000 years of suffering, abandonment, and rage, and the young pilot on the front line shook violently, her chest aching as she whispered, "You were alone." Realizing that humans hadn't vanished by accident. They had been sacrificed, betrayed, erased, and something broke inside her, guilt twisting her heart even though she had no part in it, because the truth felt too heavy to carry. The human continued, softer now, almost whispering. "We screamed into the void and no one answered. We burned and no one came. We begged and no one cared." And his voice trembled with pain so real that even hardened soldiers felt tears rolling down their faces, imagining an entire planet suffering alone in darkness while the galaxy moved on, celebrating victories, building empires, rewriting history, pretending humans never mattered. Then his eyes hardened, glowing brighter, voice steady again. "But we did not die." And in that moment every fear the galaxy tried to deny became real, because survival against extinction meant evolution, meant transformation, meant humans had become something beyond flesh and bone, and his next words drove that terror into every heart. "The universe abandoned us, but the universe will remember us." And the metallic earth pulsed with blinding white light, causing every ship to quake, every city to shake, every system to tremble as if reality itself bowed under Earth's power. And then, just before the transmission cut, the human spoke one final line, quiet but colder than death, "And we know who fired the first shot." The screen went black, and in that darkness the galaxy understood a truth more terrifying than extinction. Humans hadn't returned seeking forgiveness. The blackout after that final sentence felt endless, like the universe itself had stopped breathing, and in that suffocating silence every heart across every world pounded with the same terrified question. Who fired the first shot? Who tried to kill Earth? Who betrayed humanity? And deep inside the Galactic Council chamber a cold wave of dread crawled through the room because the oldest counselors knew the answer. They had always known. They had buried it, erased it, buried it again, rewriting history until even they could pretend innocence. But now the truth clawed its way back into the light and no lie was strong enough to stop it. And one counselor, an old trembling man with haunted eyes, whispered, "They found out." And his voice cracked like something breaking inside his soul, because he remembered the day 1,000 years ago, when fear ruled every decision, when the council watched human progress with shaking hands, terrified of how fast humans learned, invented, advanced, terrified that one day humans might surpass them all, and instead of seeking peace, instead of building trust, they chose a darker path, a coward's path, an authorized Project Eclipse, a secret weapon designed not to threaten Earth, not to warn Earth, but to destroy Earth entirely. A star killer built in silence, powered by stolen technology, aimed at a blue planet full of people who never even knew they were marked for death. And in that memory lived horror, because humans never attacked first, humans never declared war, humans were simply living, dreaming, trying to belong in a galaxy that feared them, and the council chose to wipe them out before they could rise. And the old man felt tears burn his eyes as he whispered, "We were the monsters." And across the chamber younger leaders stared in disbelief, rage, disgust, realizing their entire civilization was built on a lie, that their power came from a genocide attempt, that their extinction they taught as natural fate was in fact a deliberate strike, a murder of a world, and the shame hit them like a blade to the chest, because now the galaxy understood the terrible truth. Humans didn't vanish, they were hunted. While leaders drowned in guilt, fear, and denial, fleets across space received fragments of ancient classified files, hacked open by an unknown signal. And soldiers gasped as holograms flickered to life, showing the moment Project Eclipse fired. A beam of unimaginable energy tearing through the void toward Earth, oceans boiling, continents shattering, billions crying out in terror as their world burned. And even though the recordings were glitching and incomplete, they were enough to break hearts, enough to show the pain, the betrayal, the screams of children clutching parents as the sky turned into fire, and across the galaxy people collapsed, sobbing, shaking, whispering apologies to a species they never met, because for the first time they saw humans not as threats but as victims abandoned in their final moments. But the most shocking part of the leaked files wasn't the attack, it was what happened afterward, because instead of exploding into dust and silence, Earth vanished, pulled into a spiraling vortex of distorted space created by the very energy meant to destroy it. A tear in reality that swallowed the entire planet whole. dragging billions of souls into darkness, and scientists watching the footage now cried out in disbelief, understanding that humanity didn't die. They were forced into exile, trapped in another dimension by the very weapon meant to kill them, left alone in an endless void where no help could reach them, no star could guide them, and the ache of that truth spread like poison, breaking even the hardest hearts, because surviving in darkness for a year is hell. But Earth survived for 1,000 years, and no one could imagine the suffering, the loneliness, the hunger, the fear, the endless nights where a whole species begged for rescue that never came. On one distant planet a child watched the footage and held her mother's hand, tears streaming as she whispered, "Did they cry too?" And her mother, voice shaking, answered, "They cried alone." And that answer shattered something pure inside her, because no child, no world, no species deserved to die in silence, and yet humans did, abandoned not by fate but by choice. Meanwhile, aboard the frontline flagship, the young pilot who once feared humans now felt her heart twist with unbearable guilt, realizing she had trained her whole life believing humans were dangerous myths, when in truth they were broken survivors, and she clutched her bracelet so tightly it cut her skin, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," as tears soaked her uniform, because she couldn't stop imagining billions of human voices screaming into darkness with no one to listen. And then, as if answering the galaxy's grief, the human hologram returned, eyes colder, voice deeper, speaking words heavy with both pain and strength. "For 1,000 years we suffered, for 1,000 years we rebuilt, for 1,000 years we remembered." And he paused, breathing like someone who had carried the weight of an entire species on his shoulders, before finishing in a whisper full of heartbreak and fire, "And now the galaxy will remember too." The feed cut again, leaving only silence, but this silence was different. This silence was full of tears, regret, guilt, horror, and a sharp new terror. The terror of knowing humanity had endured the impossible, and anything born from 1,000 years of pain would not be weak, would not be merciful, would not be containable. Humans had not returned seeking answers. They had returned with the truth. From the moment they heard the words and saw the hologram, the galaxy knew they were powerless. Because for 1,000 years, humans did not just survive, they transformed, and the moment the armored Earth began to move, fleets that once ruled entire star systems found themselves drifting like toys in a child's hand. Engines humming then dying, shields flickering then failing, crew members gripping their stations with white-knuckled fear. And in the forefront of the Council's mighty armada a single young lieutenant stared at his display as the largest human warship they had ever recorded blinked into existence right behind them, appearing without travel time, without hyperdrive trails, simply there, silent, massive, black, with glowing red lines cutting across its hull, and every sensor reading collapsed under its presence. And in that instant the lieutenant whispered, "They don't travel. They teleport," and his voice cracked as his mind erased years of training, of strategy, of faith in technology. Because technology failed now, vanished like sand in the wind. Across the galaxy ordinary people watched the skies as hundreds of triangular, sleek and silent human dreadnoughts appeared above critical colonies and systems. They didn't explode planets, they rotated slowly, landing, hovering, scanning, releasing smaller black fighters that moved like shadows, strike teams stepping down onto moon bases with no resistance, no weapons fired, no alarms raised, only the sound of doors opening, boots on metal, and everywhere the same message, "We will not repeat. Your mistake." In one mining colony a father hugged his daughter, tears streaming down his face as sirens wailed, and he said, "They came so quietly." Because there was no battle, and yet the fear was greater than any war he had lived through, because unstoppable didn't roar, it whispered. At the edge of the galaxy a scientist watched as every defensive grid in her system collapsed simultaneously, lights flickering out, power plants going dark, her lab monitor flashing a single line, "System offline," and she understood instantly that the humans were not just attacking. They were rewriting the rules, rewriting existence, and in the command deck of a border fortress, the commander ordered weapons to fire, his voice shouting louder than alarms. But as his fleet launched missiles and laser bolts, every shot dissolved mid-flight, dissolved into nothing, as if space itself refused to let them move, and his engineers screamed, "Our weapons fail. Our ships drop out." And he looked at his officers with terror in his eyes. "We are dead ships," he said, voice hollow, "we are relics." Meanwhile, On Earth's armored world, the human commander watched the screens of the galaxies collapse. The screens of planets bowing, fleets shutting down, empires kneeling, and he clenched his fist at his side, voice quiet but powerful, "Let them see." And their enemies did see. They saw that no empire, no matter how large, no matter how old, could contain humanity anymore. They saw that the return was not a plea for mercy, it was the awakening of power. And in one shattered council room, the young pilot who once feared humans now cried openly, his heart broken by the scale of the advance, whispering, "They didn't destroy us. They made us irrelevant." Because it wasn't about destruction, it was about erasure of arrogance. Humans were not there to fight, they were there to prevail. And as the universe adjusted to the new reality, every soul heard the same truth echoing across space. If you think you know humans, then you don't know them at all. The galaxy had seen power, had seen war, had seen extinction, but it had never known silence like this. Silence born not from peace, but from surrender, from shattered pride, from the cold realization that everything they believed, every history they taught, every lie they clung to, had burned in the face of a returning world wrapped in steel and memory, and across millions of planets people stood frozen under the shadow of human warships drifting like silent giants, their black hulls reflecting starlight like unblinking eyes, and no one dared to speak, no one dared to move, because everyone felt it deep in their bones. The storm was not over, the storm was only holding its breath. In the council chamber, once the proud heart of the galaxy's rule, leaders sat slumped in their seats, pale, shaking, some crying openly, some staring blankly at the floor as if trying to disappear, because they knew the truth had cornered them like prey, and there was no escape, no negotiation, no lie big enough to bury what they did, and the oldest counselor wiped trembling hands over his face, whispering, "We deserve whatever comes," while another choked back a sob, realizing her entire career, her entire legacy, was stained with the blood of a planet she never even saw, and guilt weighed heavier than any weapon, crushing them from the inside. Then, without warning, every screen in every ship, every city, every station flickered to life, not with chaos, not with destruction, but with the same human figure as before, standing tall, still, unshakable, eyes glowing with that cold white light, and across the galaxy billions gasped, shaking, because just seeing him felt like standing before judgment itself, and this time he did not raise his voice, did not shout, did not threaten. He simply spoke with calm, steady sorrow that pierced. Deeper than any rage ever could, "We remember everything." Those 3 words hit like a blow to the soul, because they were not about revenge, they were about memory, about scars, about 1,000 years of cries no one heard, 1,000 years of darkness no one shared, 1,000 years of rebuilding in silence while the galaxy celebrated their death, and across distant colonies children clung to their parents, sensing the weight of those words without understanding them, while soldiers lowered their weapons, tears blurring their vision, hearts aching with guilt they didn't know how to carry. The human continued, "You erased our past, but we carried it. You erased our name, but we lived it. You erased our world, but we rebuilt it." And his voice trembled for the first time, not with hate, but with heartbreak so deep it made even the strongest warriors crumble, and the young pilot in the flagship covered her mouth, sobbing, because she finally understood. Humans were not monsters returning with cold power. They were wounded survivors returning with memories that burned like fire, and she whispered through trembling lips, "They came back because no one came for them." Then his tone hardened, icy and absolute, "You will reveal the truth," and every council member flinched, as if the words themselves were blades, slicing through their last defenses, their last denials, their last illusions of control, and he continued, "You will open every file, every record, every secret." And the images behind him changed, showing Earth before the attack, children laughing under blue skies, families living in peace, oceans shimmering in sunlight, and millions who saw it broke down into tears because this was the world they destroyed, the world they abandoned, the world they pretended never existed. "You will speak the crimes," he said softly, "or the galaxy will be forced to learn them another way." And that gentle tone was more terrifying than any threat, because it meant humans did not need to attack, did not need to destroy, did not need to scorch planets to ash. They only needed to reveal the truth, and the truth alone would break empires. And then, as if the Universe itself held still. He delivered the final message, the one that shattered what little hope remained. This is not a war. This is accountability, and the moment he said it, billions felt the ground slip from beneath them, because war could be fought, war could be resisted, war could be survived. But accountability meant there was no defense, no strategy, no weapon, only guilt and consequence. That he leaned forward slightly, eyes burning brighter, voice dropping to a whisper that echoed across the stars like a chill wind. You have one chance. One confession. One truth. And with those words the screens went black again, plunging the galaxy into darkness so heavy it felt alive, pressing against their hearts, suffocating them with fear and remorse. And in that darkness the council broke, some falling to their knees, begging for forgiveness from a species that could not hear them, others shaking violently, knowing confession would destroy them. But silence would doom the galaxy, and the young pilot stared out at the armored Earth, tears falling like rain, whispering, "Please, don't let it be too late." Because every soul in the universe understood the terrifying reality. Humans had not returned demanding blood. They had returned demanding truth. And truth was the one thing the galaxy feared more than human power. Silence swallowed the stars after the final warning. A silence so deep it felt like the universe itself had turned to stone, holding every breath, every heartbeat, every trembling hope in place. And across countless worlds people stood frozen beneath dark skies lit by the silent shadows of human warships, feeling smaller than dust, feeling like witnesses to the end of everything they ever knew. And in that crushing quiet even the mighty fleets of ancient empires drifted helplessly, powerless, engine dead, weapon dead, spirit dead. Because the truth had taken more from them than any battle ever could. It had taken certainty, pride, arrogance, and left only shame, fear, and the cold realization that the galaxy was no longer theirs to command. Inside the council chamber, leaders, once powerful, once feared, now broke apart like glass under the weight of their guilt, some sobbing, some whispering desperate prayers, some clawing at their own uniforms as if trying to tear off the shame that clung to them like poison. And the oldest counselor sank to the floor, hands shaking violently, whispering, "We destroyed a world," while another stared blankly at the hologram screen, eyes empty, voice hollow as she whispered, "We killed children." And the truth echoed between them like a ghost with a voice sharp enough to bleed the soul, because no one could run from what they did, no one could hide from what humanity suffered on the frontline flagship. The young pilot who once feared humans sat trembling at her console, tears streaming silently down her face as she stared at the armored Earth suspended in the void like a colossal heart wrapped in steel, pulsing faintly with an energy she could not understand. And she clutched her bracelet to her chest, whispering, "They deserved better," her voice cracking under the grief of a crime she didn't commit but felt all the same. Because guilt didn't care about bloodlines or borders, it cared only about truth, and the truth hurt so deeply it hollowed her chest, leaving only a desperate ache to make things right. Though she knew nothing in the universe could ever be enough. Then, while the galaxy trembled in dread, the rift behind Earth flickered again. A faint pulse of light. A whisper of distortion. A tremor that rippled across space like a heartbeat too vast to belong to any machine, any planet, any god, and every ship that still had a working screen flicked to life, cameras zooming in, scanners struggling to identify the impossible as the tear in reality began to widen again, opening into the same violent well of black and white energy that brought Earth back, but this time larger, brighter, angrier, as if the universe itself was straining under the weight of something colossal. Preparing to come through, panic shattered the silence. People screamed. Scientists shouted reports they couldn't finish. Soldiers stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. Entire planets erupted into chaotic prayer, begging their gods for mercy, and the young pilot covered her mouth, chest tightening as she whispered, "No, no, this can't be." Because if Earth alone brought the galaxy to its knees, then whatever was coming next might break it entirely. The rift tore open wider, spiraling like a wound in existence, and from its depths emerged a shape, darker than void, larger than Earth, wrapped in layered armor so thick it looked like a forged moon of metal, its surface covered in colossal symbols and lines of glowing crimson, and every scanner, every last functioning system, returned the same result, the same impossible truth, the same terrifying identification, unknown, beyond classification. Not an empire. Not a species. Not a planet, something new, something born in the same darkness that swallowed Earth 1,000 years ago, and Earth began to rotate toward it. Slowly, almost reverently. Like two titans recognizing one another, like survivors reunited after a lifetime in hell, and the human commander appeared one final time on every screen, his face calm, almost soft now, voice no longer cold with rage but heavy with something deeper, resolution, destiny, inevitability. And he spoke only 5 words. 5 words that crushed the galaxy's remaining hope into dust. Earth did not return alone. Gasps. Screams. Collapse. Shock so deep it felt like suffocation. Because if humans rebuilt one planet into a weapon, what did they build with others? And as the second armored world fully emerged from the rift, its surface split open like a giant mechanical bloom, revealing armies, ships, structures beyond comprehension, shapes that moved with impossible precision, technologies no one recognized, species no one had ever seen. And the galaxy understood a truth more terrifying than extinction. Humanity had made allies. Forged in darkness. Allies forged in pain. Allies forged in exile, allies who owed the galaxy nothing. And before the screens went black, before the rift sealed the sky in blinding white light, the human commander whispered one final sentence, so quiet it felt like a breath against the soul. Our suffering was only the beginning. The transmission cut, the universe fell silent, and the galaxy finally understood. The return of Earth was not the climax.